So, hello you people, how you all doing? So in today's video, as you can see by the title, you're most likely not partitioning your drive properly on your Linux system and you're not getting the most out of it. So, here's the thing. I'll explain the calculator later. I wanted to make this video a few days ago since I promised it to a lot of you guys. So, the thing you're seeing right here in the terminal is how my drive is partitioned. The main things you should be curious about are these two parts that I'm currently highlighting, the dev.sda parts. In fact, we can grab them out fairly easily. Okay, that's dev. Let's just do SDA. There we go. So if we clear this out and just run this command, it will show us all the partitions on our one hard drive. I have only one hard drive in the system. And you can see I have two partitions. I have a root partition and a home partition. My root partition, aka my system partition, has 256 gigs in size, or is 256 gigs in size, and this is the rest that's allocated for my home directory where all my videos, photos, and other things are stored. I wanted to go over why I partitioned it this way and what are the benefits of partitioning something like this instead of going with the standard that comes with a lot of Linux distros. They just put your home directory or your home they just put your home directory in your root partition so that if you reinstall your OS, you have to load your data back in. So as you could probably tell by this, one of the major benefits is you can literally move between distributions of Linux. For example, you don't like Ubuntu, you want to try something else. If you chose the standard method of partitioning your drive, you would have to move your data somewhere else, then reinstall, and then move your data back in. One of the major benefits of this is you can reinstall your OS as you need to, and you still keep your data. So your scripts, your pictures, your videos, and all your other stuff still gets to be on your drive without even losing it. It has a small performance penalty doing it this way, but with the settings and stuff we did in the previous few videos on improving performance under Linux, we actually gained a lot more performance back. So there's actually another post I came across while researching all of this for this video, and there's this guy. It says on a personal computer it is pretty much a good thing to do, because you'll be able to just keep your data around for longer, essentially. One of the major benefits is also that you're able to resize your partition as you need to. So for example, you have a 1 terabyte hard drive as I have, and I upgrade to a 6 terabyte one, for example. I can give it the full 6 terabytes in the future if I really need to, and it's really cool. Or I could give it a larger system partition, for example, instead of having to be worried about moving my data somewhere else. I can just keep it on my drive without even risking losing any of my data. You might have noticed I'm talking a lot about data here. Here's the thing. The most important thing on your computer, and the most valuable thing at that, is your data. It's not your graphics card, not your CPU, it's your data. Your data is more valuable than you might think. For a lot of inexperienced users, it's just a few pictures. Well, for those who are actually somewhat experienced, know that data has a larger value than anything else. In fact, if I lost any of my data now, it will be a much bigger burden than it would be a few months ago, or a few years ago. In fact, a few years ago I didn't have as much data. Now that I'm making videos, working with code, and working on all these projects, it's more important for me to have a system that works and that doesn't end up destroying all that data. Because if I lose it now, I lose a lot of time and effort that I put into all of this. As he mentions, it's also usable on servers. One of the major benefits of this is you can actually make a web server that is kind of like a storage server so that people can upload files to it. So you can have like a small system partition, but a extremely large data partition for your web server. So you can make pretty much a NAS, which has like, you can give it a really huge home or data partition, and people can just offload data to the data partition instead of clogging up your home or your OS partition. Because you have system updates to do, you have maintenance to do, and you don't want to toy around with people's data. So that's why it's better to have a separate partition. You're able to work on it without even losing anything, which is one of the bigger benefits in my opinion. There's also a bunch of guides on why you should keep your data separate on a separate partition, preferably on a separate hard drive. So one of the nice things that Linux lets you do is you can have your OS installed on a 250 gig SSD, for example, and have your home partition along with your data stored on a 1 terabyte hard drive, therefore making use of both of those drives in a really effective manner. So in case your OS gets corrupt, your data is safe on a separate drive. Now it may add a bit of latency to it, but the benefit is, in case your OS breaks, you don't lose your data, which is hopefully an obvious solution to all of this. It should make sense, hopefully. So, how do you actually go about partitioning something like this? Well, oh, that's my screen recording script, ignore that. So yeah, we do not actually need this open anymore. I'll explain what the calculator is open here real soon. I just want to go over what I'm going to do now. So right here I have VirtualBox set up, and I gave it 4 cores with 65% execution cap, which pretty much tells it, hey, use up to 65% of my CPU, nothing more. And I gave it, a 250 gig hard drive, and I mounted the Manjaro XFCE minimal installation. I picked the minimal one to make it a bit faster in my case. So we're going to click start over here, and it's going to hopefully boot into our Manjaro installation media. You can look up online how to make such an installation media if you really need to do something like this. So once you get to your Manjaro installation media, I will make a video in the future why you should use Manjaro instead of Ubuntu, and when it's a more beginner friendly distribution. It's something I have in the works still. I still need to get all my points like separated into different sections so that I don't end up rambling for far too long. Anyway, so just boot into the installation media. You can use Ubuntu, whatever you want. I'm going to use Manjaro in this case. It's all up to you what you want to use. I'm not forcing anybody. So we're going to wait for this to load, and we're going to possibly have to change the resolution and such so you guys could see everything. So as you can see, we're currently booting into our Manjaro installation. As I said, I give it a 250 gig hard drive, and soon the calculator will be really useful. So if you do not have a software calculator like I have, you can use pretty much, and I still have this, and it's extremely handy, a regular calculator. I have this. I actually bought it for like really cheap. It's a standard Casio calculator, so it's really handy, especially if you're working with tech and such. So as you can see, everything's been loaded, and we're going to untick this. It's not going to make a difference anyway. So this is our Manjaro installation media. It's a installation media, so it doesn't really matter. But let me do something here real quick. I need to change the display settings so you guys can see everything properly. So let me give it a higher resolution so your guys' eyes don't have to end up bleeding out. No, that's not what I wanted. I wanted a... Can I apply this one? Yeah, this one is good enough. So this should be a good enough resolution, hopefully. You guys should be able to see everything, at least I hope. So anyway... So what can we do with this? So you'll see the Manjaro installation media. You can ignore these notifications. The way you install Manjaro is you have this icon over here. I I'm not going to cover how you make an installation media. I may do it in a future video, but pretty much this is what you want to click on, the install Manjaro Linux thing, double click it. It may be different for your distribution, just open the installer and you should be good to go. It's in Czech, so let me change this to American English. There we go. So I've changed to American English. It's Manjaro Linux 2003 Lycia. So we're going to click next. Pick the location according to you. I'm going to pick it as it is. English keyboard, it doesn't matter. This is the part that actually really matters in our case. So instead of picking the erase disk and use it, you also want to have your swap with hibernation. This is what you will end up with. This is a standard method of partitioning a drive that will do it automatically for you. You could use this, but there's one major flaw with this. Even though you get a lot more space for your data and applications, in case the system breaks, bad luck, but you'll have to move all your data over to a separate drive or a server, then reinstall the OS and then pull all the data back to it, which is not what you want to do. Instead, we're going to pick manual partitioning. This is where the fun will actually begin. So you'll notice we have a totally blank drive here. To fix it, we're going to click here to create a new partition table. Here, let me explain a few things. You have two options. You can either pick MBR, which is what I have on my hard drive right now, or even on my main system drive, or you can pick the GUID partition table. What are the main differences? The main differences are, with MBR, you can have 4 primary partitions, 4, along with a few extended partitions, but the maximum size of a hard drive acceptable within MBR are 2 terabytes. If you have a larger hard drive than 2 terabytes, you have to go with GPT. As an example and sake of simplicity, I'm going to pick GPT. You can use it on a smaller hard drive, it's not a necessity, but by picking GPT you can pretty much ensure that it's compatible with all systems, pretty much with the majority of systems in the world. Let me just move this so you guys can see everything. So I'm going to pick GPT for simplicity's sake. We don't have to worry about anything. It's totally fine if we use it, and it's much simpler. GPT actually has a drive size limit of 128 petabytes. I think that's how large it is, the upper limit, but in any case, it's a really insanely large hard drive, and we're not nearly as close to maxing it out anytime soon with a regular old hard drive. Also, a major benefit, you can have 128 primary partitions and a lot of extended ones. Only thing that you, as the end user who's looking for simplicity, have to remember is the size. So with GPT, more than 2 terabytes, MBR, less than 2 terabytes. We're going to pick GPT because it really doesn't matter. It's more of a simplicity's sake choice. After doing this, you'll notice we have a free space partition. This is where the fun begins. So we have a 250 gig partition. Let's open up our calculator. So we type in 250, which is the size in gigabytes or gigabytes. You have to multiply by 1024 to get the size in megabytes or megabytes. And as you can see, it's 256,000, which is a large number. But remember, we have to make our first partition and start calculating from that. So we're going to click this handy dandy create button. We need to first create a partition that will be used for our boot device. So we take BIOS grub, no mount point, and I think it's a unformatted, yeah, so unformatted BIOS grub, and change the size or this number that's present in your system to 8. Because we need 8 megabytes. This is what I used for my system and it works fine. This is just to start the bootloader. The bootloader is generally a few kilobytes, so it will fit just fine on here. So pick 8 megabytes, GPT, unformatted, and as the flag, select BIOS grub. What this will do, it will make it so that the BIOS can actually the grub, the bootloader can actually be stored on there. So click OK. As you can see, we have a new partition, 8 MB or 8 MB if you will, unformatted space. Select this free space again and click create. As you can see, we now have this size available. So you want to remember this size and open up your calculator. And what you want to do is you want to type this number exactly in. So 255,987 in my case. You want to divide this by 4. So divide this by 4. I will explain why. If you divide this by 4, this will be used for our operating system. So our operating system will get around, let's say 64,000. Let's do 64,000. It doesn't have to be exactly, or we can do it exactly, but it doesn't really matter. So 64,000 as an average. So let's do 64,000 MB. So 64,000 MB, ext4 will be our OS partition. So ext4, 64 MB, which is around 62.5 gigs, that's fine. And this is important. This is our system drive, so to make it work, we have to click over here in the mount point section, keep ext4 by the way, and select the /. The / is for our system. As you might remember, in the terminal window I showed you previously, you saw that my root file system is separate, and this is how you mount it. This is how Linux will know, hey, this is something I can use. So make sure to have this selected. You don't have to select anything else, just keep it as it is. You could give it the root flag, but I don't do it. I didn't do it in my system and it does work. So pick this mount point as root, ext4, and the size you want. After doing this, we have a root partition of around 62.5 gigs. Next, we have this file size right here. So we're going to select this free space and click create. This is another mathematical thing I want to do and something I was waiting for explaining. So in Manjaro or any distribution, you should have some memory monitoring tools. I would recommend HTOP. If you don't have it, you can install it really easily. The thing we're looking for is the amount of system memory. So if you look over here in this mem section, I have around 2 gigs of memory. So what I generally like doing is I like giving the same swap size from my memory to my swap. So we will give it a 2 gig swap. I have 8 gigs of system RAM on my main workstation. Oops. Wrong terminal thingy. So in my system, if I open up HTOP right here, you'll notice I have 8 gigs of system memory and a 8 gig swap. This is how I like partitioning things, and it works out in my favor, so I'm using this. I can close this. So we have 2 gigs of system memory, and I'll give it a 2 gig swap. Here comes the fun part. So to calculate 2 gigs, it's actually really easy. You do 2 times and 1024 to get it in megabytes, which is 2048. Again, this may differ based on how much system memory you have. The number that comes out by multiplying, so if you have 8 gigs of RAM, you have to do it like this. So let's say you have 8 gigs of RAM, you multiply it by 1024, and you will get the amount of space you have to subtract from this number. In my case, I have only 2, and I know it's 2024. So the 2048, sorry. So I need to calculate how much space I need to allocate. So you want to take this number that's left on your of your drive. So 1987, fine. And you want to subtract the amount of space you want to leave behind the drive or behind the partition for your swap. I generally put it at the end. You can put it in the middle, wherever you want. This is how I like partitioning things. Or you can make it even simpler. You can just put in the amount of memory you have, like 2048, and set it to swap. But again, this is my tutorial and I like doing things a different fashion. So subtract 2048 since I have, oops. That's cool. So let's do, can we like undo things? Oh, that's cool. Close this and create a new one. So, oh yeah, it opens up this thing. I forgot I closed the calculator. There we go, kcalc, and we want to do this thing again. So 1987 minus 2048. This is the size we want to type into here. So 189939, 189939. So 189939 is the size. This is for our home partition, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, our home partition. Keep ext4 as your mount point, pick your home partition, so /home, and leave it as this. So home, this size of the drive for our home partition. Again, this is the number we got from our calculator, so if anyone is confused how we got that, it's just by calculating things. You don't have to set any flags here whatsoever, just set it as ext4 /home and the size. Click OK. As you can see, we now have only 2 gigs of space left. This is what we're going to use to create our swap partition. So, as I said, we're going to create a 2 gig swap partition for this OS to make use of it. So we're going to click Create. You wanna, in the file system, you wanna pick Linux swap. You don't have to change this, it's already predetermined. So Linux swap, scroll down and pick swap as the flag. This will make it so that your OS or your installation of Linux will use the swap partition as its main system, as its swap. So after setting this up, making sure everything is as it is, click OK. And now our entire drive is partitioned just like I would partition it nowadays. We have a 8 MB bootloader partition where our bootloader will be stored. We have a 62.5 gig partition for our OS or for our operating system. We have a 185.5 gig partition for our home user, so that's enough data for most people. And then we have a 2 gig swap partition. With all of this set up, there's one more thing you want to check and make sure. So over here you can see storage device. You want to make sure that this matches with this bootloader section. So install it. The bootloader should be installed on the MBR or master boot record of the VBox hard disk, which is DefSDA. If you're not sure, just look at DefSDA, and if DefSDA matches, you should be good to go. We can also close this terminal, we don't need it open. So with all of this set, we can click next. It's going to warn you, but we already have it done. We already gave it the flag, so you can click OK. Next, you set up your user. So we do just the regular things you would do. So test, login automatically. I pick login automatically on my installations because it's on my computers. But you generally want to leave this unticked. If you have a family computer and you want to have multiple users, just untick this. But make sure to use the same password for the administrator account. If you have a single user, that is. If you know that you will be using this computer only, just use it as it is. I'm going to tick this login automatically without asking for the password, so it's much faster for me to boot into it later on. Now, this is what I like about these things. So it shows you pretty much what is going to be used and how it's all predetermined and how your drive is partitioned. This is pretty much what you want to look for. As you can see, it already said, hey, I want to use this orange partition for my system, this for the home, and this for the swap, which is exactly what we want, and this for the swap, sorry, which is exactly what we wanted. So we're going to click install, and we're going to click install now. And now the only thing left for us is to wait through this installation process to make it so that we can then boot into our OS. And this is how I would partition the drives in my system personally. I've been using this method for about almost a month, and it really helps a lot having it partitioned this way. You'll be able to migrate between operating systems on the fly. If you don't like that distribution, you can move to another one. which is what I like. Sometimes I just want to test out a different system, you know, just for a week, and I'm like, okay, I don't like this, I can move back. So far, I fell in love with Manjaro, so that's why we're using this as an example. However, you can use this with Ubuntu or any Linux distro that has like this installation manager. So if you don't have this, you can look online how you can partition it manually, but it's much easier to have a graphical installer, just like Manjaro has, or Debian even has now a graphical installer. Ubuntu has one, Linux Mint has one, Kubuntu, Xubuntu, pretty much every major and popular Linux distro has a graphical installer nowadays. I just happen to like Manjaro, and yeah, so we're going to install that. I will make a video in the future where you guys should also consider using Manjaro Linux. It's something I'm working on. It will take a bit of time, so just be patient. So yeah, we're just going to have to wait through this installation process. Once it's finished, we should be able to boot into our Linux environment, and you should see that we have all our drives partitioned the way they should be, with all the partitions in the right places. A lot of people would recommend you to put the swap before making the home partition, but I like swapping those two because it's something that I found to work best for me. It may not work the best for you. It's up to you. I like this, so it's easier for me to do. Also, another thing, I highly recommend that you guys check out the videos about improving performance on Linux. All of those things that we've done so far are related on like improving performance, like generally in Linux, but it also works on Manjaro mostly, since it's a Arch-based distribution. So if you have a Arch-based distro like Manjaro or Arch Linux or Artix Linux, you can use those tutorials just fine. I'm not saying that you couldn't use it normally, but you know, to make things simpler, I would highly recommend that you guys use Manjaro. Again, I will make a video soon on why it's a perfect distribution for new users. I just wanted to make this video so you guys know how you should properly partition this thing and how you should make it. If you're not tech savvy enough, you can ask somebody else to do it for you, and you will notice like a really good relief and a good peace of mind that you pretty much won't lose your data as easily, which is also one of the more like strong points about using something like this compared to Windows, because Windows has just one drive. You could separate it, but it's like not ideal, so it's up to you. That's why I like Linux a lot more. It gives you more of a freedom in installing things like this, but again, that freedom comes at the cost of you knowing what you're doing. So that's why I made this video on how you should properly partition your drives. And I like this method of partitioning my drives. It's simple enough for me to do. It takes far less time. Since I had to explain all of these things, it took longer, but again, I'm able to do this really quickly and efficiently, so it doesn't end up, you know, hurting my performance or installation time. And in some cases, it's actually easier to install than Windows. Yes, Windows has a graphical installer and everything, but it's not a good OS, and not a lot of people should use it nowadays. In fact, Linux popularity is rising right now. So if you are curious or eager to learn about Linux, I have a tutorial series called Linux for Noobs, where you can learn pretty much the basics of using the Linux command line, where I pretty much show you that it's not a, you know, scary place. I even showed you like that I have a virtual machine set up, how you can set it up so you guys can learn along with me. And yes, it's a bit of an older video, but it works till this day, and I explained pretty much everything I wanted. So now that it's all installed, we can click done. We're not going to take restart now since I'm in a VM. If you're using this on a regular machine, you might want to turn off your computer and unplug your flash drive. I'm just going to shut down this just like you would a regular computer. So as soon as it turns off, we're going to go into settings and we're going to unmount the drive. So we're going to remove disk from virtual machine. So it's now empty. It's as if we didn't even have our USB plugged into our system. So now we're going to pretend that I booted it up without the USB drive in the system. So now what we should see is we should pretty much hopefully boot into our installation of Manjaro. Now the resolution will be lower, but I will change it, show you that all the things are in place and that everything is as it should. Again, since I'm running in a virtual machine, it takes a little bit longer to do, but you know, it's easier for me to record and explain instead of having like a separate camera. Oh, there we go. Says that OS does not support mouse pointer integration. It will take a little bit of time to load. Just you know, just be patient. It takes a while to load, but it's still faster than Windows on even older machines, especially on hard drives. You have to bear in mind that I'm currently recording, running a VM, so I'm not giving the best, you know, amount of time for my system right now, especially for my hard drive. But we're booted right now. As you can see, it drops us directly into the desktop, which is what we wanted. So we need to wait for it to load everything. As you can see, everything has been loaded. We're inside of our system. So now we can do things as we need to. I'm going to untick this. You don't really need this, but if you're a new user, I highly recommend that you read up on the documentation. There's a lot of things explained. So now I'm going to go into display actually and change the resolution so you guys can see everything properly. It will say virtual 1 because we are in a virtual machine right now. So if some of you guys are cringing, I hope you have a good reason. This is actually big enough, so let's keep this configuration. But didn't I use this previously? Anyway, so now we are in our Linux environment. So let me open up the home folder. What you will notice is we have 172 gigs in our space. If we go to our file system, we have 53.5 gigs, which is how we wanted it. So we have a separate system partition, which is our root partition, and a separate home partition, which is exactly what we wanted. There's actually another way of checking this. So inside of Manjaro, there is a utility called gpod, so we can open up gpod and have a look. It will ask for your password. In my case, I am using test as the password since this is a virtual machine. So we're going to give it some time to load, and as you can see, it's exactly how we wanted it. Here is our boot partition or our bootloader. Here's our system partition, which has our OS installed, which as you can see has only 6 gigs compared it to Windows, now using around what was it, 40 gigs? For like at a tenth of the space, and it's a much better OS and it's simpler to use. Then we have our home partition, where all of our files, documents, videos and stuff can be stored. And then we have our 2 gig swap that we've created. You can ignore these 3 megabits, it's nothing. You can ignore this. As you can see, it doesn't impact the functionality whatsoever. To show you that we actually do have the swap enabled, we can open up HTOP, which is well, we can open up HTOP, but also other utilities. But HTOP is a prettier utility in my opinion. As you can see, we have 2 gigs of our system RAM, and then we have 2 gigs of our swap. So it has been applied and everything is running. As you can see, we're using only 605 megabits of RAM, and this pretty much concludes the installation extravaganza of how you should install your system. You can pretty much use it as it is. Now this is a minimal installation, so there won't be all the utilities, but you can in fact install a fully featured version of this distribution where you'll have various kinds of software pre-installed. The reason why I picked this one is so that we can demonstrate this and use this in future tutorials to pretty much install various kinds of software and do various kinds of things. But again, this was just a VM to show you how you should partition your hard drive. And as you can see, it's fully working. It's a fully featured desktop environment. It's all running as it should. We're currently installing NeoFetch. It has been installed, so if we run this, you'll notice we're running Manjaro Linux inside of VirtualBox. We have this resolution, we're using this amount of RAM, we have the video adapter from VirtualBox, so it's actually a bit faster now, and it runs just fine, and we're using a lot less RAM than we otherwise would on a regular Windows instance. Windows actually uses up stock around 4 gigs of RAM, so using 600 megs of RAM brings a lot of life to older machines. And on that note, I would like to thank all of you for joining me today. As you can see, it's a fully functioning desktop environment. Everything is in here that you possibly may need. And I will soon make a video on why you should use Manjaro as your main operating system, and why is it better for essentially tech newbies. So yeah, and on that note, I would like to thank all of you for joining me today. It was a bit of a longer video, but it was really necessary for me to explain everything. I'm going to upload it now. It's around 230 megabytes, which is far smaller than it would be otherwise if I used a different piece of software to record. So yeah, still smaller, runs perfectly. I want to thank all of you for joining me today, and I will see you guys hopefully in the next video. So yeah, see ya.